Welcome to a very special episode of App Stories that's brought to you this week by Runway, SourceGraph, and Instabug. I'm John Voorhees, and with me as always is MacStories Editor-in-Chief, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you on this very special day?
I am doing very well, thank you. Federico, I'd like to introduce you and our audience to a very special guest that we have with us today for an interview. It's my pleasure to introduce everyone to Vivek Bhardwaj, who is with the software product marketing team at Apple, and who is talking to us today about some of the more interesting and exciting features that have been added to Apple's OSs in the recent past, including things like universal control, shortcuts, live text, and a whole lot more. Welcome to the show, Vivek.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. I want to dive right in and talk to you a little bit about universal control to get started, because I'm someone who has worked for years across both an iPad Pro and a Mac. And one of the things that was always caused friction for me, despite enjoying kind of the process of having both those systems available to me, was switching. Sometimes I've tried things like keyboards that easily switch with the press of a button from one system to another, stuff like that. But it was always a little clunky. There was never a perfect solution. And to me, universal control has really removed that friction and made it so that I am now using an iPad in conjunction with my Mac every single day. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak to a little bit the original motivation behind universal control.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first it's great to hear that universal control is going to ease that pain that you've had over the time working with both the devices. But one of the things that we've strived for with universal control is actually something we've been building for many years now. Continuity, as we call it, for many of our features, and I'm sure these are things you're well familiar with. Things like AirDrop, handoff, sidecar, the ability to unlock your Mac just with your Apple Watch. These are features that we've been building over the years that really have kind of helped us set the foundation for universal control. When you think of technologies like Bluetooth Low Energy, knowing where devices are, using peer-to-peer Wi-Fi, all of those low-level technologies, as well as kind of this seamless handoff experience, universal control is really just that kind of next step in our journey here for continuity. And we do think that users are going to be really excited as they begin to use this with iPad and Mac in so many of their workflows. And so, yeah, it's something it's been working, in the background as we've been building these features. And some of the things that we wanted to focus on was that really seamless, frictionless setup experience. So, the fact that you can just bring your iPad, put it down next to your Mac. Like you said, many users who have a Mac today typically have an iPad as well. And now with a single keyboard and mouse, you can kind of seamlessly move back and forth between them. And so we think that's a really simple and easy experience, but hopefully unlocks a lot of capabilities for our users.
And Vivek, you mentioned how Mac users tend to have an iPad, and you can take your iPad and place it right next to your Mac, and it just works with universal control. And that was my experience, right? As a recent Mac user once again, and I want to talk about this in a few minutes, sort of as someone who's come back to Mac OS to an extent. But I installed 15.4 on my iPad and I updated Mac OS, and it just worked out of the box. But what you just mentioned, how there has to be a Mac in the mix, right? You cannot do universal control from iPad to iPad. And what you just said made me think about this, like, is it because you envision this sort of scenario in which users have a Mac and an iPad, but not two iPads necessarily, which, in that case, it doesn't really make sense to have universal control. Was that the reason why a Mac needs to be at the center of universal control?
Yeah, we designed Universal Control with kind of both Mac and iPad in mind. We wanted customers who have both of those to really enjoy using them together. And so,
Right.
think of it more as like pairing those two devices together, and then being able to take full advantage of them. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of Mac users we know, have an iPad. And so just extending that capability for them in this really simple way, we felt is a really powerful experience. And, I think one of the things that, when you look at something like Universal Control, and you look at how people use iPad today for very unique things, as well as Mac for very different and unique things, the fact that we can bring them together, the keyboard and mouse are paired to work across both devices. But sometimes you may forget that, and as you know, that's iPad OS and Mac OS kind of working in tandem. And so it's not just two devices. It's actually two platforms, and each of those have very unique capabilities. So, if you're someone who uses Apple Pencil on your iPad, you're, in that creative moment, building something, you're able to just bring that over to your Mac, use Universal Control, and seamlessly go back and forth with perhaps some other app you're using on Mac, to kind of finish that project off. And so being able to go between two platforms is a really powerful thing. And we're excited to be able to put that in our users' hands.
Vivek, one of the things you said a couple of minutes ago really struck me, which is that, this universal control is kind of a natural evolution of continuity and a lot of the other OS level features that have rolled out over the last several years. Could you talk about that a little bit more? Because my sense is, just from understanding what the requirements are for universal control to work, is that there are a lot of different core technologies involved here, whether it's, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, handoff, all those things, both that are either both, standards on which Apple features are built, or those up more higher level features like continuity or the universal clipboard or those sorts of things. Well, what's that coordination like?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's kind of happened over time, and we've been building towards it. And, when you think of, as you mentioned, with technologies like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, we're innovating on top of those standards to deliver this kind of seamless experience. But, when you think of some of the other elements, we needed to get iPad OS to a point where we had drag and drop, right? There was a time where we didn't have that capability. We brought that into the platform in a way that we felt made a lot of sense. And that then became a really natural interaction with universal control. But it was not just drag and drop. It was bringing, the keyboard and trackpad support, as you know, to iPad OS in this really unique and powerful way. And so taking advantage of some of those things that we've built in the platforms over time, as well as the technologies like AirDrop, handoff, even Sidecar, all of those things have really been kind of the part of the building blocks for universal control. And so for us, it just felt like a really next logical step to be able to tightly integrate these things. And as you know, really only Apple can kind of bring the hardware, the software, and that tight integration together.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Runway. Mobile releases waste time and cause headaches, with more hidden work than many teams realize. You're constantly bouncing between numerous tools, things like GitHub, Jira, CI, the app stores, your crash reporting platform, and pinging your team members back and forth on Slack and running through massive checklists to get your app ready for launch. This exercise in herding cats plays out over and over every week or every couple of weeks when you're releasing frequently. Runway's team of former mobile engineers knows these problems all too well and thought there was a better way, which is why they built Runway. Runway is a first-of-its-kind platform that serves as mission control for your mobile team. The platform makes app releases more collaborative and improves your workflow by connecting third-party tools to automate everything from kickoff to submission to release. Runway makes it easier for engineering, product, and QA to be on the same page by creating a single source of truth. A complete, reliable, and end-to-end picture of the state of work is pulled together in one place, and status updates and blockers are proactively communicated to your entire team. Runway helps your team shift left by looping in QA and other stakeholders earlier, providing more visibility and facilitating pre-production builds and test groups in test flight and the play console. Post-release, monitoring is made easier with key stats, stability info, and crash information surfaced and combined with data from your entire tool chain to make triaging issues and tracking release performance a breeze. Runway is trusted by top mobile teams including DoorDash, Flare, ClassPass, WealthSimple, and many more. Runway is saving them time, shortening their release cycles, increasing release confidence and quality, and even helping them recruit new team members. Runway's team has decades of combined experience building and releasing mobile apps, so they'll be on your team's side throughout the entire release process. Get in touch with Runway for a demo or sign up to get started today at runway.team. MacStories listeners will receive a free month of service. Again, that URL is runway.team to learn more and sign up today. I'll put a link in the show notes too. Our thanks to Runway for their support of the show.
And Vivek, I wanted to talk some more about that. What you mentioned a few minutes ago about it's not just two devices working together, it's two platforms working together. It's macOS and iPadOS. And that to me is really the beautiful thing of universal control. It's not Sidecar. Not that Sidecar wasn't great, because turning an iPad into an external display, that's great. But as an iPad user myself, I feel like universal control, by keeping macOS and iPadOS distinct but working together, that's a really powerful message. It's two platforms coordinating to make you more productive, to make you more efficient. Now, as someone who's, I've been working on the iPad Pro for years, and I consider iPadOS sort of my primary platform, for all the things that I do on a daily basis. But at the same time, especially because of Apple Silicon, I've really been rediscovering macOS over the past few months, and it's been quite a journey because it's been sort of like a muscle that I've had to train again, from scratch. Mm-hmm. So trying to, especially because of shortcuts, which I would love to talk about, some more in a few minutes. But having shortcuts really pushed me to, maybe I should check out macOS again. So now having universal control feels kind of like it was made for people like me, where I have an iPad, but I also have a Mac. And now I don't feel like I'm, in a way sort of punished for switching between devices. I'm kind of rewarded for having multiple platforms in my workflow, right? It's so easy and seamless to move between them. And so I kind of wanted to get your take on this maybe new kind of user, right? Someone who has an iPad, someone who has a Mac and uses both. Sort of how do you see the coexistence of these two platforms for people like me?
Well, first, I'm glad you're rediscovering macOS, and it sounds like you're really enjoying it, which is great to hear. And I think especially now with, as you mentioned, kind of our transition that we've been doing over the last little while to Apple Silicon, it's a really exciting time for Mac. And I think one of the things we've always seen is when users are kind of incorporating more devices into their workflows, whether it be moving from iPhone or iPad or, now iPad and Mac with universal control, satisfaction really goes up, right? People are generally very pleased when they're able to bring more of these into their workflow because it just helps them be more productive. It helps them, do more efficiently. And so that's kind of the first thing that we're really, we're not surprised that, folks like yourself are rediscovering Mac. I think it's a great time to do that. And, features like universal control really just do, extend that opportunity to use these two platforms together and enjoy what Mac OS has to offer as well. So I think, one of the things to bear in mind is when we're building features and experiences for our platforms, we recognize that each platform and product has a distinct role, right. Offers unique capabilities. But at the same time, users expect and, we work hard to deliver this kind of consistent experience throughout our ecosystem, right? It's important, as I'm sure you've seen with apps like Shortcuts, to have that familiarity as you move across different platforms in the Apple ecosystem, but at the same time have some things that are a little unique to each platform that let you go a little further. And so that's kind of always been, our approach when it's coming to building features for our platforms. And I think, when you think of the workflows that universal control could unlock and being able to use a Mac and iPad, in this way, I think there's huge opportunity here. I've seen just in my own workflows, and I'm sure, as I'm sure you guys have experienced, we've been living in a video conferencing world for a little while now, and I often now have my iPad set up with WebEx, and kind of have my conferencing applications open, and I then just work away on my Mac. I can come in and out of meetings. And I'm just going back and forth, and it's really simple, really easy, and just a workflow like that. Having something like universal control just makes that very, very easy for me. And so I think there's a lot of those use cases that are going to appeal to everyday users. This isn't a feature, or universal control is not a feature just for creatives and just for pros, but it really can speak to anyone who wants to be able to bring these two devices together and kind of just go back and forth as they use various apps, whether they be creative, video conferencing apps, taking notes with your pencil on an iPad, being able to move, files and images back and forth. We think those everyday use cases are really going to help many of our users.
Right. And consistency, but a little unique, you said, to each platform. And that really, I feel like that idea really captures your approach to really, once you think about it, you can see it everywhere, right? Because all the apps and the features that you're making these days, they are consistent, but also a little unique, right? So for example, you have Safari, and Safari looks, very similar between the iPad and Mac, for example. You tend to have, the same top bar layout, and you have the menu with the tab groups, but it's also a little unique because on the Mac, you can do some things with keyboard shortcuts that are different on the iPad, and on the iPad, you have some gestures that are optimized for iPad. So I feel like that has to be one of your guiding principles, right? As, when you're when you have this feature that you want to roll out on multiple devices, consistency, but respecting sort of the unique nature of each platform. Like that must be challenging, though, I assume.
I think I think our engineering teams and our design teams get really excited about that. I think they see that as a real opportunity to innovate on each platform and really dial up kind of the uniqueness that each platform gives them, as opposed to kind of something that is a little common across all. They can, our teams can actually go deeper on each of them and really be able to make a feature stand out. We did that with things like live text, recently, where that was a system-wide experience. But as the team was building it across iOS, and iPadOS and macOS, we really looked at kind of those areas where we expected natural touch points for users. We knew on iPhone, the camera was going to kind of be that go-to experience. On Mac, we understand that a lot of people take screenshots and deal with preview and markup and these other editing tools. And how can live text be a part of that experience? How can we extend it to the web so that it works in images and in online as well? And so I think it's a really exciting opportunity for the team to be able to go deep on each platform, and hopefully for each of our users, deliver something that they're really delighted about.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by SourceGraph. These days, every company needs to be a tech company because there's so much code to deal with. It's hard to have any kind of online presence or digital service without copious amounts of code. And code affects everyone. It's the foundation of the technology we use every single day. But handling big databases can be tricky, especially when you think about the volume and variety of code. So thankfully, SourceGraph is here to solve all your company's code-related headaches. They are tackling big code. More than ever, companies need resources to increase developer velocity, to give people what they need to be agile, innovative, and productive. With SourceGraph, developers can figure out how to use a particular function, find and solve problems more quickly, identify what impact a code change will have on its dependencies, and a whole lot more. SourceGraph is the future of how companies are built, and it's powering the infrastructure of today's most successful high-growth businesses, including 3 out of 5 of the biggest tech companies. SourceGraph's current customers include PayPal, Uber, Plaid, Reddit, Atlassian, and so many more. If your company uses code, you need SourceGraph. Go to about.sourcegraph.com today. That's about.sourcegraph.com to find out why some of the biggest tech companies in the world are using SourceGraph and to see what it can do for yours. Our thanks to SourceGraph for their support of the show. Vivek, I think that's a good way to kind of segue into shortcuts and talk a little bit about shortcuts for the Mac in particular, because it is one of those. It's an app that has been around for a long time now on the iPhone and the iPad, but is brand new to the Mac. And while there are wide areas of overlap in terms of the actions that are available on each platform, each of those devices is unique, so it makes sense that a lot of the actions are also unique to the platforms as well. Could you explain to us a little bit about how you view the role of shortcuts for iPad users versus Mac users, and how those two groups, I guess, differ, and what the reaction has been like from Mac users for having shortcuts for the very first time?
I think, I'm sure you've seen that the feedback's been extremely positive on the Mac. And, as you know, when we announced shortcuts for the Mac, there was a lot of excitement. And, as we mentioned back then, it was really part of our goal to kind of be the future of automation on the Mac platform.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're excited to keep continuing that work on that journey. And another part of our goal with shortcuts has always been to bring it to as many devices as possible. And as you mentioned, we started with iOS, which I think, we're fortunate because it was a really great place to start. It allowed us to kind of build something that was approachable, was automation, but could be powerful, could extend and work with so many apps, but feel approachable for many users. And so that was a great opportunity to build something on that platform and then kind of scale it up towards Mac OS. And, I think that has allowed us to, as we've kind of moved up these platforms, is really think about how people are going to use shortcuts on each device, the types of shortcuts they're likely to build, to run, to use, and the apps that they want to use them with, the connectivity experiences that they want would differ on Mac OS compared to an iPad or an iPhone that's a little more mobile. And so I think that's been a really exciting journey so far. And I think when we look at kind of shortcuts in general, as you know, there's a very large and passionate community behind shortcuts. And I think bringing this to Mac has really allowed us to kind of, listen to that community, continue to get feedback and continue to build, automation on Mac OS. And so, yeah, I think it's been extremely positive. Like I said, great feedback so far. And, we continue to hear lots of great kind of ways in which people are using shortcuts. And we're, going to continue to keep innovating in that space.
As you can imagine, Vivek, I have some questions about shortcuts, but I promised that I would keep the technical stuff at a minimum for this show. However, there is one feature that I would like to talk about with you. So in iOS 15.4, you added this new option for the personal automations in shortcuts. And the option is this new toggle. It's called Notify When Run. So you have this setting that allows, I suppose, more advanced users, folks who really know what they're doing, to say, when I set up an automation that runs, I don't know, on a schedule, or when I switch locations, one of those triggers, I don't need to be notified every single time that the automation runs. And that is potentially, dangerous territory from a platform perspective, because you're essentially allowing actions to run in the background without the user knowing about them. But I really liked the compromise that you've sort of reached with this feature, which is, even if you disable the notifications, you still get a summary at some point later saying, hey, 15 or 20 different automations recently ran in the background, and now you can review them. And I would love to know what was the sort of the balancing act that you needed to figure out here to sort of enable this feature for power users, but also make it secure, make it safe for everybody.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're a fan of the feature, which is good
yes,
to hear.
Very much so.
So I think when we're designing features like this, and in fact any feature we're building, as you know, privacy and security are paramount to us, right? We focus on building that in from the start, and this is really kind of has always been grounded in our principles of making sure users are in control, and that the system and the device is transparent. And so, as you mentioned, this is something that you can, turn off, on a per automation basis. And we still want to make sure that users get notified, right? That they're made aware of this. And so there's that transparency from the system where they're still being informed about those notifications. And then at any point, they're in control to be able to turn that back on if they wish to be notified. And so we think, focusing in on something we've always delivered, which is kind of that transparency and control, is really important when it comes to features like this. Because as you mentioned, when it comes to shortcuts and the variety of things people can create, sometimes, especially for power users, these shortcuts are, as you know, many, many steps long, connect to a lot of different things, apps, data, other devices. And as a result, we want to make sure that, users are well informed and always in control. And so that's really kind of the thinking behind giving that capability to users so that they're in control, but also making sure that they are notified, that they're always kept informed. And that's always something that we, focus in on any feature we build.
It's really interesting. I have a question about shortcuts for the Mac. One of the things that I think is very impressive about the app on the Mac is the large number of ways that you can run a shortcut. I mean, I don't think that anyone before this was introduced anticipated that shortcuts would be available from the command line or run through AppleScript or something like that. And those are powerful features that have really made shortcuts on the Mac useful in ways that weren't or aren't possible on iOS or iPadOS. The one thing from my standpoint, as being someone who works with URLs an awful lot, that seems missing though, is that on iOS, I have the ability to run a shortcut using the share sheet. But on Mac, that's not the case. There's a share button, and I understand that from a technical standpoint, those things are built a little differently on iOS versus the Mac. But any particular reason why that's not available on the Mac?
Yeah, it's a good question. When we were building shortcuts for Mac OS, as you mentioned, we really dug deep to kind of look at all the ways in which users, interact with kind of data and apps and their various workflows. And we wanted to make sure that shortcuts could meet them there, right? And whether that's, running a shortcut right within Finder when you're working with files, which we know is a popular one, through Spotlight, through, the menu bar, the command line, being able to scale that across all the different types of users who may use it in many different ways was something we focused deeply on. And so that was kind of our way of making sure shortcuts was optimized for Mac OS. And, when you think of the share sheet, historically, that's always kind of been something, an iPhone, an iPad that is just a very common action, right? We're sharing stuff all the time on the go, whether it's photos and messages, things we find, in apps or online. And so that felt, the right type of workflow there. And, as behaviors change and people continue to use shortcuts in interesting ways, that's just great feedback for us. And we're always going to evolve that experience over time to kind of better meet the needs of users.
Right. And Vivek, this is not necessarily a question, but just more something that I wanted to tell you that I really appreciate is on shortcuts for Mac, the command line integration that you've done. It really surprised me in a positive way because it's not just that you've made it possible for people to run shortcuts from the command line, and you've explained this at WWDC last year, you've also made it possible for power users to sign their shortcuts to, from the command line. If you have a shortcut file that you've manually exported, you can now sign it again. And that has been incredibly helpful for me because I had this backup of my shortcuts from years ago. I believe it was a backup of shortcut files from 2018. And those obviously were no longer supported, right? I could no longer open them in the Shortcuts app because they were not signed. That was before the signing system that you've introduced last year, I believe. But now, thanks to the command line, I've brought all those shortcuts back to life. And what's even more impressive is that not only have I been able to add them back to my library, but even if they were shortcuts from 2018, they're still working because all those actions are still sort of backwards compatible. And so I guess maybe there is a question like, that must be difficult, like to ensure compatibility, across multiple generations of shortcuts. I took something from 2018, from 4 years ago, and it still worked pretty much out of the box in 2022.
Wow, well, that's so good to hear. I think the team will be really happy to hear that as well. One of the things that we, as we, when we announced shortcuts on Mac, we were really kind of mindful of the, automation crowd and kind of the tinkerers that have lived on Mac for many years and the workflows that they've set up. And so that was something that we really focused in on to make sure that, compatibility was there, to make sure that we could, gracefully move people over and as right. Automator is still there today, but Shortcuts is the future of our automation on the platform. And so it was really important that we take those steps, make sure that users like yourself and many others can bring things that have been created from a while ago, and not only bring them over but have them work. And so that's something that the team is definitely focused in on, and we know is important to users, especially on the Mac platform.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Instabug. Building mobile apps presents some challenges. Bugs, crashes, and performance issues can be a nightmare for developers. But what if I told you that you could not only detect these issues, but also get a holistic understanding of the quality of your app from your user's point of view? Instabug's lightweight SDK grabs all of the insights you need to build top-quality apps through comprehensive bug and crash reports, performance monitoring, and real-time user feedback, all in one SDK. With Instabug, you can continuously monitor and measure the performance of your app as perceived by your users. Empower your users to report issues and ask questions seamlessly from right inside your app. Get all of the information you need about bugs, crashes, and other issues, and get them fixed in record time, all with a focus on privacy and security. And you don't need to worry about the hassle of switching to a new tool. It only takes a minute to integrate Instabug into your app, and it fits right within your workflow, with support for services like Jira, Slack, Trello, GitHub, Zendesk, and over 10 other popular tools. Join over 25,000 top mobile developers around the world who use Instabug to ship high-quality apps. Go to try.instabug.com/appstories to learn more today. Again, that's try.instabug.com/appstories to learn about this great service and to sign up today. Our thanks to Instabug for their support of the show. I'd like to ask you, switching gears a little bit, about live text. This is one of those features that the very first time I used it on my iPhone, it was one of those wow moments. It's very similar, I guess, in a way to universal control in that it's one thing to have a feature like that described on stage at WWDC and think, oh, that looks really interesting. It's a whole nother ballgame, though, when you actually try it for the first time and it works seamlessly and without, a lot of effort on the user's part. And the thing about live text that's really fascinating to me is that it's happening on device. And there's got to be a lot of trade-offs and advantages to doing that way. What are some of the things that go into those considerations? As I suppose, as opposed to something like sending that text up to a server somewhere to OCR it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. And I guess, much like, and you kind of called out that live text in a lot of ways is similar to universal control, and I think part of the rationale there is it was designed to be as easy and as natural as possible, right? We wanted to design this experience where there is, text all around us, right? In our photos, in the world around us, online, and being able to interact with that in a really natural way was a really important goal as we were developing live text. And when you're trying to build an experience like that, this needs the most performance, the highest performing experience. It needs to feel like this is, in the user's hands, that they can interact on text, in an image or through the camera, just like they could when you're, say, editing a document. It needs to feel that natural, that responsive. And so, this was kind of a no-brainer to be able to run on Apple Silicon. And I think when we've been building Apple Silicon, when you take things like our neural engine, which is capable of, many, many operations when it comes to machine learning, that's a great opportunity for us, right? Something that Apple can really dig deep on and deliver in such an efficient way. And so, we set out to build live text not only as this thing where you pull out your camera and point in the real world, but also to work on text in any image, whether it's a screenshot of an app, a photo in your library, an image on the web. And again, we wanted that to feel really fluid, really seamless. And so running this on device was absolutely the way to go. And so not only does it give you that great performance, but, it also gives you that privacy as well. And that's important, right? As you know, Apple cares deeply about our users' privacy, and it's critical for us when you're interacting with data like this that those things can remain on device. And I think we've proven time and time again, in fact, that you can build great features and privacy. You don't really need to compromise on either.
Right. One of the things that I think has got to be exciting for the teams that build something like live text to see is how, once it's in the hands of users, it's actually being used. What kind of things have you seen people use live text for? And is there, have there been any use cases that you really didn't anticipate going into this?
Didn't anticipate. Well, I don't think we anticipated, and I'm sure we all saw the student copying class notes using their iPhone.
True.
That one made me smile for sure. So we didn't quite anticipate that one, but we've seen, a lot of different ways it's been used. I continue to hear from friends and colleagues who, have found just really simple ways of, hey, there was this website link or email in this image, someone text me, and now I can just tap on it, go straight into that email or open that web page. And sometimes they don't even realize that's live text, right? It feels that natural that they're just doing it. And so that's something that I think has continued to surprise people. Me personally, I actually had something not too long ago where I needed to locate a serial number. And this was, I had a faulty dryer, and This thing was a 20-digit alphanumeric number. Of course, it was kind of located in a really awkward place on the machine. And I was actually online filling in the form on the manufacturer's site. And I right there, I kind of tapped in the text field. Normally you'd just have to type that 20-digit number out. And I simply tapped scan text, lifted the number off, dropped it in the field, and there it was. And so I think there's a lot of those really everyday, easy use cases that people have kind of come across, as well as some of the more kind of, creative use cases that we've seen where people are kind of out and about and using the camera. Maybe they're pointing it, at an address they see on a billboard or a poster, and being able to quickly, launch maps or go online. And so a lot of different ways in which people are using it, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's I do that, Vivek, for the password on the back of my Wi-Fi router. I do that all the time because it doesn't have a QR code, and so it's the easiest way is just to lift the plastic thing and scan it with live text, and it's excellent. I wanted to wrap up with this question about another feature that you launched in iOS 15 last September. And I believe it's recently expanded to other regions, maybe, the lookup integration in Photos. So in Photos, how you can have these additional details that are found in pictures. And I believe those includes animals, plants, places, of course, paintings, maybe, and other objects recognized by the Photos app. Can you talk a little about sort of what went into making this feature possible, and what's the response been like in terms of people opening Photos and discovering that, hey, Photos is actually seeing things that are in my pictures, and that's awesome.
Yeah, and the feature you're kind of referring to is visual lookup, and it was something we kind of built in tandem with live text, really because when we started kind of our journey with live text, we, as I mentioned, recognized there's all sorts of rich information in our photos, and text being one of those. But of course, as you know, our photos are full of so many interesting objects and things we capture, in the world around us, as well as things we see online as we're kind of browsing the web. And with visual lookup, one of the things we wanted to do was really kind of take advantage of our powerful on-device machine learning capabilities with our Apple Silicon, and be able to do some really quick recognition of some quite common things that people see. Maybe it's a photo of your pet, or maybe you've taken a photo of a flower while you're out hiking and you want to know what species it is. Maybe there's a painting, some art, a famous landmark, some interesting buildings. Even actually, a colleague of mine told me about this recently, where he kind of has this habit of taking photos of books that people recommend, he reads. Huh. And, he then has this whole catalog, and not just photos, but he, grabs screenshots of them as well on things he sees online. And now with visual lookup, you're able to just, tap into that image and even launch Apple Books, start downloading the book and read it. And so it's not just unlocking information, it's actually giving you some really great actions you can take on the things that are in your photos. And so, yeah, we're excited about that capability as well, because we think alongside live text, it really does bring your photos to life. And so we think there's just a wealth of rich information inside photos that users could really benefit from, being surfaced to them in these really easy and elegant ways. And so, yeah, we're excited about both live text and visual lookup.
Yeah, it really unlocks some interesting information. I've had a lot of fun trying that as well. Vivek, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you about all these topics. These are things that, as I guess you probably know, Federico and I think about quite a bit, and universal control has been something in particular of all the things we talked about. That and shortcuts for the Mac are two things that I've dug really deep into and really enjoyed using. So, great to talk to you in depth about those as well. Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. It was great to talk about some of these, like you said, amazing features, and we're excited, hopefully, for all your listeners to kind of be downloading and updating and playing around with all these great capabilities.
All right, that's it for today. I want to thank our 3 sponsors again for this episode. That's Runway, SourceGraph, and Instabug. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.